In this video, I'm testing Vapi and Synthflow in 7 areas from ease of use and telephony options to latency, pricing, and hidden costs to see which is the better platform for building voice AI agents. I'll also link to a side-by-side comparison below with all the results, and you can plug in your requirements to see which tool's the better fit for you. So let's start with Vapi. So Vapi prides itself on being built for developers, and in practice this means a couple of things. Firstly, the API is very good. It's very well documented. Last week I was doing some stuff hooking this into an NAM workflow, playing around with the API, and it just makes sense. It's clear that they've put a lot of thought into this, which you would kind of hope given that the name is literally an abbreviation of Voice API. The other area where this is really evident is that Vapi is very customizable. You can bring your own API keys for any part of the voice AI stack. You can also bring your own custom LLM model if you want. And so if you're trying to connect this into a third-party web app or build any kind of larger workflow or system where voice agents are a part of that, Vapi make it very easy to do that. In some respects, Vapi is essentially providing voice AI infrastructure. That said, I would argue that Vapi is also one of the easiest platforms to build voice agents on, since they released workflows. So traditionally in Vapi, you would build voice agents or assistants where you drop in a massive prompt here and then you just sit back and hope that your agent does what you want it to do. This has some disadvantages because the more information that you add into the prompt, the more context, and so you get slower latency, but it does give the agent a lot of flexibility. Now, at the end of last year, Vapi released workflows, which allows you to build voice agents in a visual canvas. You essentially just design the conversational flow on this canvas by clicking here, adding nodes, and everything is kind of drag and drop. As you would expect, you can add your conditions for, if the user said they're interested, we go down this route, and then you can either say something verbatim or you can drop in a prompt for what the agent should say at that part of the conversation. Everything is customizable, so you can change the model that is used for this node, you can attach knowledge, you can give it access to tools, which we'll touch on in a moment. And yeah, virtually everything is customizable. You still have a global prompt, so you can pop that in here. But the nice thing is that this doesn't need to be as long if you're building in a workflow because you don't need to enter any of the conversational flow rules here. You can enter those in the individual nodes. So this really just needs to be about things like the role, the persona, and any guardrails for things that you don't want your voice agent to do. So whether you're a developer or not, Vapi is pretty easy to work with. Now let's touch on telephony. So I'm going to go over to phone numbers. Now by default, Vapi give you 10 free phone numbers, which is pretty generous. They are US numbers. There's a couple of restrictions, like you can't do outbound calling via a campaign with them. So the likelihood is if you're actually building a production agent, at some point you would need to import your own phone numbers using something like Twilio or Telnix. But the free numbers are very helpful if you're either doing inbound calling or frankly just for getting up and running and doing some testing quickly without having to faff about with all of this. So let's move on to voice realism. So like most voice agent platforms, Vapi integrates with 11 Labs, but you got a few other options like Cartesia, Element, Rhyme AI, and then Vapi has its own voices, which are pretty decent. So if I just go into one of our agents, I'll show you. So if we just go into one of our agents, I'll show you how this sounds. Now, again, a really nice thing about Vapi is you don't need to have it actually call your phone when you're testing. You can just go up here, click call, which simulates a live call, which doesn't use as much credits and just makes it easy to test.
Good afternoon. Thank you for calling Serenity Spa. How can I help you today?
Hi, I'd like to book an appointment.
Well, what treatment would you like to book today?
I would like to book a haircut.
Great, thank you. Let me check our available slots for haircuts.
Cool. So you get the idea. And that was using the default Vapi voices, but you can obviously change that to any of these options. Now, let's touch on integrations, because if you're using Vapi, chances are you're probably going to need to be connecting it into something else. So we've got a few different node types that we can use to connect this. We can either send an API request or we can connect it into a tool. So you build tools separately and then you connect them to your workflows or your assistants as kind of a separate step. So if I were to just add one here, we can drop down and select tools. These are just some ones that I've built previously. But if we go out of here into tools, we can kind of have a look at how this works. So if you create a tool, you've got a couple of native integrations, including Model Context Protocol. So you could use that to connect into something like make.com, NAN, or anything with an MCP server. But Vapi's also got a few other native integrations. So Slack, Google Sheets, Google Calendar, and Go High Level. And the high level integration is pretty detailed. There's quite a lot of stuff you can do with this. Also, there's a Go High Level MCP server you can use separately as well. So for these ones, all you need to do is enter your API key and you're good. But assuming you don't want to do that, you can also trigger HTTP requests. So again, you could use this if you want to trigger workflows in NAN, make.com, Zapier, that kind of thing, or just have it communicate directly with your app or whatever product you're using. So I'd say Vapi is not bad. There are some other platforms like Synthflow, for example, which have a huge range of native integrations. But I think because Vapi is primarily designed for developers, frankly, most people using this are not going to be put out by that. Now let's touch on call concurrency. So by default, I think you need to go into billing now. I think they've recently moved it. If we go into billing, you can set your call concurrency. I think it's down here. Here we go. So by default, Vapi has a call concurrency limit of 10 phone calls. If you need more than that, you need to buy additional phone lines, and they cost $10 a month each. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe there's any upper limit to how many phone lines you can add, other than, of course, your budget. So let's move on to latency. When I ran a standardized latency test with Vapi, the average latency I was getting, this is end-to-end latency, was 536 milliseconds, which is the fastest I've seen of any platform, and frankly, pretty incredible. If you're getting that in a production agent, I would be pretty happy with that. The other nice thing to point out with Vapi is you get a lot of insight into where that latency is falling, and also when you're building your agent, you can see an estimation of what your latency is going to be at different parts of the process. So you can see your transport latency, the LLM stage, the transcription, and then also the voice engine. And equally, when you go into your call logs, you can sort of see this breakdown as well for the actual calls. So if you go in here and we go to the latency summary, we can see what the actual latency was. So this helps when fine-tuning your models and your prompts and your configuration to make sure you're getting the best latency possible. And because Vapi is so customizable, you're not limited by the platform with ways to bring this number down. And then finally, let's touch on cost. So pretty much across the board, Vapi is the most affordable platform for voice AI agents. And the reason for that is, again, Vapi is essentially trying to bring voice AI infrastructure. So you can use it to build your voice agents on and then connect all your own API keys and pay them directly rather than it will go through Vapi. So here, just as an example, we've got 5 kind of leading voice AI platforms. This is based on 3,000 call minutes per month on a typical stack. So GPT 4.1, DeepSeek Nova or DeepSeek Flux, and 11 Labs Turbo V2. Vapi, $270 a month, and then the other platforms are considerably more than that. And you can see the breakdown here. So Vapi charge you basically a 5 cent per minute fee. And then if you use Vapi for things like the voice engine and the LLM and telephony, you're obviously going to pay for each of those. Generally speaking, I find Vapi comes out to around like 9-10 cents per minute, which is quite a bit cheaper than the alternatives. There are a few other things to be aware of. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying these are like hidden costs, but they're things to just be aware of. So if you're in healthcare, for example, this is an additional $1,000 per month if you need HIPAA compliance. Similarly, if you need 60-day call and chat data retention, it's an extra $1,000 a month. So there's certain things like this, and obviously call concurrency, if you need to have 100 phone lines, you're going to rack up costs pretty quickly. But generally speaking, in almost every circumstance, Vapi is going to be the most affordable platform for building voice agents on. So next up, let's have a look at Synthflow. So Synthflow is a no-code platform for building voice agents, and they've been making some pretty big changes recently. They've rolled out their Flow workflow editor, also massively overhauled their pricing, which we'll touch on at the end. But if we jump into their platform, I'll quickly show you kind of how easy it is to build voice agents on their platform. So until recently, building voice agents in Synthflow meant you had to add everything into a single prompt. Now you can build agents in their Flow Designer. Now this is in beta. I personally find it a little bit buggy, but you can see where this is going. And the benefits of doing it this way is not only is it more intuitive visually to see all the different routes, but there's also some latency benefits doing it this way. But as I say, this is still kind of in beta and it still has a few rough edges. But as you can see, like most visual voice agent platforms, you've got this nice kind of canvas over here, and you can add your nodes by just clicking here. You can enter your prompts in here, and we've got all the kind of expected nodes. You can do call transfers, you can add conditionals where we have these different routes, and you can also trigger tools. I think they're called actions in Synthflow. So like most tools, you need to build your actions separately, and then you can kind of connect them in here. Now, where Synthflow is quite different to other tools is that because it's primarily designed for no-code, Synthflow has quite an impressive range of native integrations. So you've got Zapier and Mate.com, which effectively mean you can connect your Synthflow agent into literally thousands of other tools. Got a Go high-level integration, Cal.com, which means you can connect it to Google Calendar. Then we've got a couple of CRMs. So this is really nice because it means if you don't have a developer or you're not comfortable messing around with webhooks and MCP servers, you can still connect your voice agent into other systems that you might be using. very quickly. And of course, if you do want to connect this into tools using code, you can. Like, it still has a decent API. You just have these options available if you are non-technical. So let's talk about telephony, and then we'll go on to voice realism. So inside Synthflow, you can buy phone numbers. So they're $1.50 a month. These can only be US, Canadian, or Australian numbers. So if, like myself, you're outside of those countries, you will probably need to import your phone numbers again. And you can do that the usual ways via something like Twilio or Telnix or via SipTrunk. One downside in Synthflow is that you can't test your agents directly in the platform without buying a phone number. So it has to actually call your phone, which is a bit annoying, but I think that's something that is going to change soon because, as you can see up here, when you click test, we've got this option down here called simulation and it says coming soon. So potentially by the time this video is out, that will not be the case. But as it stands right now, you either need to chat with your agent via text or have it actually call your phone number, which means it needs to have a phone number connected to it. So in terms of voice, we've got usual options available. The default voice engine is 11 Labs, as you'd expect, and you can either import your voice if you've created one on 11 Labs, or you can clone it directly from the platform by uploading some audio files. From some of the testing I've done with Synthflow, I'd say the voice configuration is not quite as natural to some of the other tools, but it's still pretty good. And you've obviously got a huge amount of control down here to tweak that and get it to a point where you're happy with it. So let's talk about concurrency. So by default, you get 5 concurrent phone lines, which is not a huge amount. For most businesses, that's going to be fine. But if you get busy periods or you're doing large outbound call campaigns, you're potentially going to need more than that. Now, latency is an area where I've got a few gripes with Synthflow. So from my testing, I was getting a huge range of latency. This was a standardized latency test. So I used the same prompts and the same models across a bunch of tools. And Synthflow had the slowest latency at around 1 second. More to the point though, the thing that particularly bothers me is that unless I'm being really silly, and let me know in the comments if I am, I couldn't find this number anywhere in the platform. I had to actually work out the latency by measuring the time between the different waveforms. Now, I would expect to see it in either the analytics section, which I can't see anywhere, or in the call logs, which again, I can't see anything here telling me the latency. So to me, this is just a bit of a red flag. So let's now move on to pricing. And this is a bit of a moving target because Synthflow has just made some huge changes to their pricing. Until about 2 months ago, Synthflow was one of the few tools where you could pay a fixed monthly plan. But like most voice agent tools, they've moved over to pay-as-you-go, which personally I much prefer because if you have lumpy call volume, it means you're not kind of underpaying and then overpaying. Also means there's an incentive to improve your agent's efficiency by using different models, etc. So generally speaking, Synthflow is not the most affordable. In fact, let me go to Voice AI Guide. This is going to be a little bit easier to compare. So Synthflow is this third column here. And you can see that for about 3,000 call minutes per month, we'd be looking at around about $423 a month, whereas alternatives, we can sort of shave off $30 or what's that, about $150 a month for, this would be Vapi. And you can see the breakdown of where that falls here. Now, this is an estimate. This is not exact because we're essentially trying to convert tokens into minutes into dollars here, which is imprecise. And all of this is going to be affected by what models you use for text-to-speech, speech-to-text, the LLM models. If you want a more precise option, you can go to Synthflow's pricing page and enter in exactly what you would use. But generally speaking, it is not the most affordable option, but you're essentially paying a premium for the fact that it's no code. You've got those pre-built integrations, and it's essentially reducing the time that it's going to take you to build an agent and get it into production. So both of these are great options for building voice agents on, and given that you can try both of them out for free, I'd recommend doing that to see which one's going to be a better fit for your use case. Now, I'll drop links to both of them below, as well as the side-by-side comparison I put together. And if you'd like to watch me live build the same voice agent on both platforms, as well as 4 other voice AI tools, and then live test them with real phone calls, you can check that video out here.